Yo, what's going on, family? I appreciate everybody tuning into this live. It's going to be an interesting discussion because it's a discussion based off of a discussion. It's a discussion based off of a discussion I had with somebody that really kind of changed my opinion and outlook on thoughts on borrowing from your 401k. So we're going to talk about, is there ever a smart time where you should borrow from your 401k? Hey, and I'm going to tell y'all my stories of when I borrowed from my 401k and how it went. As always, I appreciate everybody tuning in. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. I'm Marcus, the Debt Free Dad, where we're talking finances, attorney reactions, current events, everything in between. We always try to tie it up to the money most times. Hey, licensed attorney, but not y'all attorney. So this isn't legal or financial advice. All right. So if you're new to the channel, you haven't heard this story. I borrowed from my 401k on two occasions. One, when I was young and really stupid. I was like, and there could be certain means that would justify you borrowing for your 401k. So that's definitely not a negative thing. What's going on, sis? I appreciate you tuning in. It's definitely not always a negative thing, but I think I was maybe like 24 or 25 and I was contributing to my 401k and I was like moving one, two, three, four, 5 states away, 4 states away, something to that effect. And I was relocating my whole family, and I was like, you know what? It's not cheap to move a whole family and a gang of stuff when you got a house and everything. So I bought like $7,000 from my 401k to facilitate the move. Now, again, at the time, it made sense because I didn't have $7,000 to load all the stuff up, pack all the stuff up, get the moving trucks, all that stuff cost a whole lot of money. Isn't that cheap? You know what I mean? Let me check out sis comment here. Yeah, I paid off super fast. Yeah, it wasn't a large amount though. Yeah, I mean, and it depends on, of course, how fast you can pay it back. But I borrowed from my 401k once. I didn't pay it back because I just really wasn't worried about it. It was $7,000 to move the whole family. But I'll tell you, I did the math maybe a couple years ago on how much that $7,000 would have been worth now had I just left it alone. And I don't even want to explain what it was. Needless to say, it was a lot of money. Think about it. That was, damn, that was a long time ago. I'm old. That was like that was like 15 years ago. So it would have been worth way more than that $7,000. But that's neither here nor there. But somebody enlightened me on a smart way to borrow from your 401k if you're disciplined. So I was like, you know what? It actually made sense. So I was like, well, let me bring it to the community and see what their thoughts are. And the discussion was around getting a car, getting a new vehicle. Now, generally, the general rule is just try not to borrow from your 401k. The general rule that I follow for cars is if you could pay it off cash, great. But I've never paid off a car complete cash when I bought it. I normally pay it off in somewhere between 12 to 18 months. I figure if I can knock it out in 18 months, I'm good to go. So this was the scenario, right? He was like, "Yo, I needed a new car and I needed something reliable." He had what he would like to call, and y'all probably had him. I had a community car before. A community car is a car you have where you're only comfortable driving it in about a 30-mile radius. Like if somebody said, "Hey, you got to drive this car 4 hours to do something," you would go rent a car because you don't trust your car. So he had a community car at the time, right? Now his kids were getting older. I think the oldest was getting ready to go to college. And they were going to college like 6 or 7 hours away. He was like, I need something that's reliable. Now, he only buys a car, and he'll typically buy a new car. Well, not new, but almost new, used car. But he said he'll typically buy it like maybe once every 8 to 10 years. So it's not like it was something he was doing all the time, right? But the car he wanted was $40,000, and he was like, "Well, the interest rate at the time was like 7% for an auto loan, and he had good credit. It was just interest rates were actually high as hell." So what he did was save up half of the money. So he had $20,000 to put on the car. Now he could have financed the rest at that 6.5, 7%. Or his other option was he can borrow the $20,000 from his TSP and just pay it back. Now, typically, I was like, I don't know. That sound your Nissan before it got totaled. I put it on I-40. Okay, I mean, if you had it on I-40, hey, that car was a trooper then if it made it. That car was a trooper if it made it. Cause I know I had some cars and I'd be like, where you need me to take you? I had to look at the map, be like, nah, bro, that's outside of 60 miles. I'm good. My insurance will only tow it free within 60 miles. So if you gotta go 59 miles, I could do it. But if it's 60 miles, I can't do it. So he was going to buy a car. He was going to pay half up front. He didn't want to pay 6 or 7% on the remaining $20,000 that he would need to finance. So his rule of thumb was I can borrow from my 401k because borrowing from my 401k and paying myself back is cheaper than paying the bank or the car dealership 6 or 7%. And I thought, okay, that's true. Well, what are the criteria for you borrowing from your 401k to get a car? And some people, you got the Dave Ramsey guys who say pay for a car cash, but it's depending on where you live at, sometimes you actually need a reliable car. Everybody talk about getting a beater, and a lot of times you get a beater, you get a car that you pay $2,000 for, and watch. I guarantee you're probably gonna have to spend another $1,500 in the first, normally 3 to 4 months. Normally that's how it goes. So these are the criteria. I'll borrow. He said he'll borrow money half of the price of the vehicle. So he got to have half to pay up front for the vehicle. He'll borrow the remaining amount from his TSP if one, he's been at that job and he's been contributing to that TSP for at least 4 years. That's point number one. Why is that? Well, if I've been contributing it to it for 4 years, I know I probably got a decent amount in there. And if I've been at the company 4 years, it's a good likelihood that I don't got to worry about getting a pink slip or being fired. Because if you borrow from your retirement plan and you lose your job, you have 60 days to pay back the total amount of the money due. So I was like, okay, point number one, make sure you've been contributing to your retirement plan and make sure you've been employed for at least 4 years so you don't got to worry about getting axed. He was like, but this is the other thing. And I thought about it. I said, oh, this was important. He said, if you were going to be making a $400 payment anyway to a car dealership at 6%, you might as well make a $400 payment to you at 0.5%. And that extra 0.5% you're paying is actually going back into your retirement fund. Now, here was the catch. You have to put half of the price down on the vehicle that you want. You have to have been employed at the job for at least 4 years. You have to have been contributing to that retirement plan for at least 4 years. The payment that you're paying yourself back has to be equal to the payment that you could afford to pay the car dealership or the bank that you were going to finance the car from. And you can't not decrease, and I thought this was the smart part, you cannot decrease the amount of the contribution that you're doing to the bank. And so what that means is if he was contributing $600 a month to his retirement plan and he borrowed half of the price of the car, $20,000 from his TSP, he would have to be able to pay through his check the $400 a month to repay his TSP or his 401k loan. Plus, he can't reduce his investments. He still will have to contribute the $600 a month to his investment. And initially, I thought, like, you know what? That don't make any sense. But when I sat down and actually thought about it from a mathematics standpoint, it actually makes sense. And he's like, typically he would pay it off in the same amount of time he would pay off his car. He never had a car payment that would last more than 24 months. So it would have to be within the 18 to 24 month that he would pay it off. But he avoided 6 or 7% to a bank or a car company because he just borrowed it from himself. I thought that was actually smart when it was explained to me. Now, hey, that being said, you do have to have discipline. You do have to have discipline. You can't just be like, yeah, I'm gonna just go borrow $100,000 and buy a used Bentley. That would be crazy. I definitely need one in Nashville the way this traffic is set up. Oh yeah, yeah. I've been in Nashville traffic before. It's not Los Angeles, but it is pretty terrible. But yeah, I thought that that was a really good idea, and it's something that I didn't really even think about, because there's sometimes, you could get a beater, but sometimes you actually need a reliable car. And him and his wife at the time, he said we were in a position where we were like, man, my kid's gonna be whatever 600 miles away. I need to be able to get up there and not have to worry about my damn piece of trash car breaking down. So I thought that that was a dope idea. Y'all let me know what y'all think about that in the comments. Yeah, I think my mind is a little bit is shifting a little bit, and I think the Money Guy. I don't know if y'all ever seen the Money Guy show, but I think they got a really fair rule for vehicles. I think their rule is 20 is 23 and 8, 23 8. You have to put at least 20% down. You can't finance the vehicle for no longer than 3 years, and the amount that your monthly payment has to be 8% of your take home pay. It can't be no more than 8% of your take home pay. And you have to be investing per month more than your car payment is. And if it was a luxury car, you have to be able to pay it off within a 12-month period. So I thought that that was actually a smart approach. I never thought about it before, but it opened my eyes. Finances and personal finances are different to everybody. And there are some ways that borrowing from your 401k could mathematically be advantageous if you have overall good financial responsibility. Now, if you're just terrible with your finances, like if you're terrible with your finances, probably don't do it. You have to be real with yourself and understand where you are. But if you actually disciplined and pretty good with your finances, that is a tool that you can use to avoid paying higher interest for something that you need that's reliable as opposed to going through a bank or financial institution. Now, before I get out of here, I want to talk a little bit about job interviews, and I'm probably gonna have to split this up. So let's talk a little bit about job interviews. All right. Now, I don't know. Most people like I don't know. I get. Do people go on job interviews a lot? I feel like no. Generally, I don't think people go on a lot of job interviews a lot. But as me being the laid off lawyer, I've been going through a lot of job interviews. First interviews, second interviews. So they're pretty interesting. And I've sat on. I mean, I ain't gonna say thousands, but hundreds of job interviews as the panelist, as the deciding official in the second or third interview. So one, it's some weird ass people who go on job interviews. Okay, the weirdest job interview candidate who came in where I was sitting on a panel. I was sitting on a panel. We already got the questions formulated. We got to ask everybody the same questions for consistency, so the process is the same. Nobody can ever complain and challenge the process. Oh, let me see what Sis said about the vehicle. I probably crossed all the lines with this vehicle for sure, but I didn't borrow from my 401k. Still thinking about Carvana. I didn't go on a job interview a lot. I suck on interviews. Really? You think you suck on interviews? I don't know. You sit on the camera and talk all the time, but I guess it's different though because your videos, you got nice lotion hands, so you just talk with your hands a lot. But I don't know. I think is a when he explained that to me, that actually made sense. He ended up borrowing $20,000, not paying 6 or 7% interest over the 18 months, and essentially paid himself back. And he was able to continue to contribute at the same rate to that retirement plan. So I think it worked out. But I was on an interview panel once. We all had our questions lined up. I never sit in the middle. If I'm the deciding official, I always sit like on the left or the right because for some reason the person who in charge always want to sit in the middle, and I generally don't want people to know who's making the decision. So I had to get a swig of pineapple juice. So we all going through the questions like, and it's just round robin. Person A, then me. Person A, B, C, A, B, C. After the third question, one, the guy didn't even show up in a suit. Now I may be old school in my thinking and ideology, but if somebody said, "Oh, you got an interview at place A," the first thing I do when I'm researching that company because I don't want to look stupid, I'll go on their website and look at pictures just to see how people are dressed. so I can get a climate. If I look at the pictures and if I look at the website and there's no pictures, it's all words, I know it's a tight ass establishment. I need to put on a suit. If everybody got on suits, I'm gonna put on suits. If I look at the picture and everybody got on like jeans and they got like colorful furniture, like some Google-esque type of stuff, I know that it's probably gonna be a little bit more lax. You could probably throw on some khakis, some chinos, a collar shirt, and a Carlton Banks sweater vest or something to that effect. But we're asking this guy a question. So one question fired off. Then I fire off one. The third person on the panel asked a question, and then the guy was just like, and his answers were pretty, they weren't knockout answers. They were probably about C minus answers to the questions. But after the third question, he was like, excuse me, can I ask you all a question real quick? And I was like, go ahead. And he was like, I don't even know what job I applied for. Hey, the look on my face was it was a look of utter disgust and annoyance because I was like, these stupid ass millennials, which is crazy because I'm a borderline millennial. I'm technically a millennial, but I was like, I had to say it with a straight face. He was like, I don't even know what I'm here interviewing for. I don't think I applied for this job. And so I was just like, so like I looked at the people beside me because we all was looking like, what the hell is wrong with this guy? So of course I asked him, I was like, okay, is your name such and such? Yes. Okay. Have you applied or did you apply for whatever it was, a program analyst position with this particular agency? He was like, well, I don't recall. So my next question was, because I don't like to waste anybody's time, I was like, look, do you wish to continue this interview or are you saying that you want to end the interview now? And so, of course, he was like, well, since I'm already here, I'll go ahead and continue the interview. So we go through the interview, and like, soon as we was done, we was like, okay, it was a pleasure meeting you. Stood up and shook his hand. Soon as we was done, we was like, put him in the do not hire pile. Like, it's just some people who show up on interviews who are so unprofessional and like, even if I didn't know what I applied for, I'm gonna just sit down, shut the hell up, and answer the questions to the best of my ability. But now this guy, so like, if you don't have enough common sense to think on your feet in a situation like that, I'm not hiring you. I don't give a damn how good you are at the job. And the second one, it was a young lady, and before they would come in, my executive assistant was out there. So the candidates will come in, they'll sit in the lobby, tell the executive assistant, I'm here. She was cool. Shout out to Tiffany. She was, I'm here for the interview at 3:30. Okay, I'll let the panel know and I'll come back out and get you. She'll come in and be like, okay, your next one is here. So we already chopped it up about the resumes. We going back and forth. And I don't know. I think this maybe was some computer position, some computer science position, maybe an investigator or agent. I don't know. But my assistant comes in, the candidate, Miss Such and Such, is here. I'm like, okay, send her in 3 minutes. So, after we get all our comments out, we're sitting there and she comes into the interview, right? And she was dressed relatively professional. I didn't think that she was dressed unprofessionally. Younger sister, probably early mid 20s. Um, and so after the interview was over with, and she actually did a good job, I would say she probably, if I gave her a grade, she probably was like an 8 out of 10 just on her response to the questions, her demeanor, how she conducted herself, her eye contact, and all that. So she interviewed very well and actually seemed knowledgeable about it. And so on this panel, there was two guys. It was myself, another gentleman, and a woman colleague of mine who were on the panel. And after she left, we was like, okay, everybody was like, okay, might have been the best that we've seen so far. My executive assistant came in, and I know she wouldn't make this up because who would make this up? She said, she was like, before this young lady came in there, she asked me how many men are on the panel, right? Because we sent out the information, but she just wanted to confirm, are the same individuals you told me sitting on the panel? Nobody switched up, 2 men and 1 woman. And she was like, yeah, it's the same amount of people on the panel. Then my assistant said, then she unbuttoned the top button of her blouse. Then went into the interview. That's crazy, right? So when you're dealing with this interview game, it is crazy. It's some wild people out here who, like, I don't know, they just don't like. I don't know. When I go, the interviews give you the sweats when you talk, your heart beat fast. Yeah, some people are like that. All you got to do is prepare. And I found like I'm probably annoying because I like talking and I like conversing. That dude showed up in like a sweater and some khakis at like a super professional, dry, tight organization. Hey, what's going on? I appreciate you tuning in, sis. And so, but yeah, she asked my assistant to confirm the number of men on the panel. Then before she went in, she like unbuttoned the top. She's like, before she came in, she unbuttoned the extra button on her blouse. I was like, whoa, that's wild. And I was like, this was like when the Me Too thing was real hot. I was like, it took that's somebody you take the application, you take the application, you like, yeah, you put them in a do not hire pile. So some people are wild. So I say that to say all interviews aren't created equal. I typically think I do well at interviews because I think is a twofold thing. One, I'm knowledgeable about a subject area, so I don't really got to do that much research. If it's something that I'm applying for, I could probably consider myself a conversationalist. Like I like to talk, and I typically make good impressions. Like if if they just looked at resumes, I'll be like, oh man, I don't know if they just looking at resumes. But if they say, hey, we want you to come into an interview, I immediately feel 1,000 times more confident because I just know I've always had the demeanor like, okay, if you put me in front of someone, I can sell myself. So I've been making these round robin of interviews, private agencies, government agencies, all across the board. And interviews are pretty consistent for the most part. Most times, amazingly, at the ripe old age I am, I'm normally still either at the same age range of all the attorneys in the room or younger. Attorneys is typically an old profession, so like if you 40 in the attorney game, that's like being 22 in most other games. If you 40 in the attorney game, so typically I'm still either same age range. Most times I'm probably one of the younger side of the attorneys in the room because it's just an older profession. It's like doctors, you know what I mean? That's point number one. The game hasn't changed in interviews, but I did get asked a question that I thought was interesting, right? I did get asked a few questions that I never heard. She was trying to get that job by all means. Nah, man. Nah. Once you tell me that you undo the top button, once I know you undid the top button before you go to the interview, I'm like, nah, fam. Because I'm a guy like, I typically when I have meetings with people, I don't even like close my door, depending on what the meeting is and who it is, because man, people can say anything, and all it takes is one person to say something, and I was like, nah, Brody worked too hard. I worked too hard. I appreciate it, Judy. And I worked too hard to have some allegation come up over something stupid. So that's kind of been my game plan. But so far the interview's been well. They're typically three people. It's normally three people. That's the normal format I see. I go to an interview, it's three people in the room, is a panel style. I'm really comfortable with that style, and I think it's probably because I'm just a comfortable person around people. But when you're in the military and you go before a promotion board, that's how you go to a promotion board. You got to study all these thick ass manuals and regulations and know it off the top of your head. Then you go into a panel. You got to sit down literally like this. You got to sit down as if you're standing up at attention. I can remember being in a military promotion board and I'm sitting there and it was a fly in the room and it landed on it was like on my face and I felt like one of those feed the children commercials. I was like, I couldn't move. I was like, I just answering the question. Even afterwards, they was like, man, I was shocked that you answered that question when that fly landed on you. Like, we was in Iraq and it was like a field promotion, but you still had to do a panel. And man, it was like 1,000 degrees. That fly landed on my face. I was like, the maximum effective range of an M16A2 rifle is like I had to keep the Stonewall Jackson face. So, but I think that's why I'm good in those panel interviews because it's just something I've been doing since I was 19, 20 in the military. I always kind of interacted in those interviews. Nothing out of the ordinary. The few things that tripped me up, not tripped me up, but were different. one interviewer asked me a question that I never heard before, right? And I don't know if I answered it how they thought I would answer it. It was the last question too. They was like, okay, sell us you as a candidate for the job, right? Now, if somebody asks you to sell us you as a candidate for this job, my initial thought was, and I jumped right into it. I didn't have to think about it at all because I jumped right into it. But my initial thought is, I think most people are going to be like, well, I'm really a hard worker and I'm collaborative, I'm results oriented, I'm commercially aware, so I understand how my day to day tasks impact the strategic goals and objectives of the organization. Most people are going to give you that standard language, right? So that's not what I did, right? And I don't know if it was, well, I guess it was good because they actually called me back for a second interview. So, but they was like, sell us you. We got all these candidates, sell us you as a candidate. I sold them me as if I was like doing an infomercial that came on at like 2 in the morning after network TV wrestling. So it went something like this. I said, look, you're used to seeing all those other products and attorneys on the market, but this attorney right here, this is an attorney that is unique, versatile. It's like a car. Every car can get you from point A to point B, but the thing that makes a car and make you want it is because of all the extras that it brings. I said, so I mean, but the way I gave it, I literally presented it like I was the sham wow guy who come on at like 2 in the morning. Hey, if you want to get this attorney, like it was real crazy, and I could tell it was crazy because everybody kind of chuckled and laughed. But that was a, I'm not gonna say it was a, that was a curveball question that I didn't get asked, that I thought was interesting. Another question that they asked that I got asked that I thought was interesting. It was, what was it? It was, name something that you use that cost under $5, but it's extremely important. What is something that you use that costs under $5 that is extremely important? And so I knew that answer immediately because I'm telling you right now, if I didn't have a knife or a can opener, I would never eat anything in a can. So I said can opener, but those were two interesting interview questions. But overall, the interviews were going well. Um, and it's, same general information. I think the problem a lot of people have when they go on interviews is it's a twofold thing. You have to sell yourself, but you have to sell why the company needs you or why they can benefit. So all of the research that I do on the front end, I don't really do research just to find out like, oh, well, what do they do lately? I do research to find out what is the issue that needs to be resolved. They're bringing me in here to resolve something. What is the issue that they need to resolve? So normally if it's a private company, I'll go to their 10K or their quarterly SEC report. If it's like a government organization, I'll go to their annual report that they file with Congress or local state legislator. Because whatever improvements or operations for improvements that, whatever improvement areas they have, they're going to identify in that result. And then I'll just spin it. Look, this is my skill set, and I believe I can bring value to your organization. I had a chance to take a look at your annual report, and you always got to start out like that. Because the first question, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but the first question they always get asked is, tell me about yourself. Tell me about yourself. And people historically start off like, well, it all started in Bloomberg, Mississippi. You're like, what? Like, people normally start at the back end and then they come all the way forward. And it should be the inverse. You start from the most current thing and then you want to go backwards. But that first question, those are the first question and the last two questions you ask are generally the most important. So the first question most times is going to be, tell us about yourself. It's real simple format. This is the format I use. I think is golden. Hey, y'all can borrow it. First of all, always thank. Hey, first of all, I want to thank you all for allowing me the opportunity to have this conversation about this vacancy with your organization. I had a chance to take a look at the position description, and I feel confident that I can bring value to your organization. If I had to use 3 words or phrases to describe myself, I would say works well under pressure, collaborative, and results oriented. In addition to that, I'm also commercially aware. What I mean by being commercially aware is blah, 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 blah. Then I'll throw an example in. For instance, I'll talk about something that happened currently, and that's it. And sometimes y'all may not know this, but I always try to slide a joke in. Like I generally always slide a joke in or something like that. Um like the joke I normally slide in is when I say works well under pressure. I'll say something like, and I also work well under pressure. Why? Because I look at things differently. When you're in a war zone getting shot at, not getting shot at isn't that stressful. So so unless I have to have a trial while I'm getting shot at, I'm really flexible and able to adapt to changing circumstances. And most times that gives people a little bit of a chuckle to have that sense of humor as well. But that first question, tell us about yourself. You got to knock out the park, and you got to come across confident. And hey, it could be a generic question you develop, but you have to tie it into how you could benefit the company. This is my skill set. This is how I can tie it into the company. These are words I would use to describe myself. For instance, in my previous role, at my current role, XYZ, then you throw out an example. And the follow-up questions are probably the best questions to ask, because most people ask like, "Are y'all teleworking?" or "Do I got to come in the office? How many times a week?" Don't nobody want to hear that shit. If the first thing you ask me is, "Y'all still teleworking?" I'll be like, "Oh man, this dude ain't trying to come into the office." So don't ask anything like that. Find out all of that stuff later. Okay. Typically, I normally ask, um, "What are three characteristics that are vital for someone to be successful in this position?" Because when I ask that, I know for a fact they're gonna cover something that I already said. They're gonna name a character trait that I already said. Oh, got to be collaborative, work independent, think outside of the box. They're gonna say something that I probably already addressed throughout that conversation. And then the last question that I always ask, and I think is a good question, and it puts them on the spot. I ask this, and I don't ask it all the time. I asked it at the last interview I had. I can't say where, just say it's with an alphabet soup agency in the government. And I know the question worked out well, because the next day they was like, "Okay, we need to check your references." And I know for a fact they already called my references. And I don't know about y'all. I've sat on hundreds of interview panels. I've been a deciding official more times than I can probably count on my hands and toes, and of everybody in my family. I never check the references. This is just me. Some places may do it differently, but if I call your references, or I have somebody set up an appointment so I can speak to your reference, I'm going to give you an offer. I've never checked the references of, okay, let me check the references of the top three individuals. I don't got no time to do that shit. People are busy. I don't got 15 minutes to talk to three different people. You got to talk to nine people. Why do I need to talk to nine people to narrow it down out of three people? Each person got three references. Hell no. Nobody, I don't, people may do it. I've never done it. I've never seen it done it in any business practice on any level. So most times, if they're calling your references, if they're calling your references, it's a strong chance you're probably the top candidate. And the only way you can probably screw it up is if your reference is like, "Hey, that dude was capping. He didn't do any of that stuff he said he did." You know, yeah. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? That's a good question too, because like a lot of people, I don't know if y'all remember back in the day, people thought it was a good answer to that question. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? People thought it was a good answer. I see myself in your position. No, no, shut the hell up. That's a terrible answer to a question of where do I see myself in 5 years. Okay. So and there's always keywords, because they may ask you, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Or why do you want to leave your current job and come to a new job? And nobody want to hear anything negative. So the where do I see myself in 5 years? I'll say something like, well, like I said, I want to work with an organization that's fast paced, that's flexible, that's constantly changing. One thing that I like about this particular area, every time the Congress changes, laws in this area change. So you have to be aware, you have to be up to speed with what's going on. In 5 years, I want to continue to be a contributing member to this organization, perhaps in a leadership role, but I definitely want to be someone that people in this organization can come to resolve problems. In addition, I also see myself in a role where I'm training probably new staff or providing training on a particular area because I built up my skill set to a point where I'm a subject matter expert. That's how you ask that question. If somebody say, "Where do I wish somebody would be like, hey, where do I see myself in 5 years?" They're like, "I want your job, DFD." I'll be like, that's me checking the no box. Like, nope, nope. I don't want to deal with that. So that's probably a good way or a good approach to answer that question. But let's see what other wild questions. Um, I think somebody once said no. The last question I always forgot the point I was going to make. The last question I always ask, and this is a good question to ask because it directly puts them on the spot. Because maybe this is just me, but sometimes it depends on where I'm doing the interview at and how the interview is going. But like sometimes I've said on interviews and I was like, man, I wish somebody just came up and asked me, like, I'm asking you expressly for this job. I said like I would, and I've done that before. And it worked. I've got an offer, but it depends on the environment. You may do that in some environments if they're a little tight, they gonna think you wild. They like, oh man, this dude's wilding out. But typically, one of the best questions to ask is, okay, based on your needs for this current position, do you think my skills, experience, and values fit well with someone you can envision in this role? Because because you're pretty much tying their hands up. You're pretty much tying their hands up. I ask that question, and I don't ask it on every interview. I normally ask that question like if it's certain jobs that I'll take, and I'll take for much lower pay because it's something that I want to do. So if it's a job that I really want, because I'm like, man, this work is entertaining. I know I can learn a lot and do a lot. If it's something like that, then I'm gonna go ahead and ask that question. And so I put them on Front Street. I gave them the, I literally, and I sit at this same background. I sit at this same background. Y'all, they see all my posters up and everything. So, but I ask them, okay, considering what you're looking for in this role, do you think my skills, experience, and values match well with someone who would fit in this role? They're not gonna be like, no. Like if they say no, you probably just you probably would have felt early on you don't even need to ask that. So I asked that question. Their response was, "Oh, well, definitely, of course. You definitely were one of our top candidates, but that's all we can say." They was like, "You were definitely," because they laughed. They all kind of laughed. They was like, they all laughed when I asked that, and I was like, they was like, "Yeah, definitely one of our top candidates, but that's all I can say." And then we had a laugh because I said, "Hey." I said the interview guy who video I was watching on YouTube said I should ask that question at the end, and everybody kind of bust out. Everybody kind of bust out laughing. But if you can find those relatable moments, because a lot of interviews are going to be dry, if you can find those relatable moments, that always brings value. So even if like I'll look up somebody on LinkedIn, and I'll look up somebody on LinkedIn, and if I could see something that they do in their personal life that messes up well, I'll use that. I saw that one lady was on like a college track and field team, and I used to do triathlons back in the day. So I was like, oh, that's a point that I could kind of bring together to build something in this relationship as I'm sitting here doing that interview. So yeah, things get wild on interviews. The interviews are going well. Of course, I got some follow ups, some places where references are being called. So I feel fairly confident that something's going to come up. So I'm not really too worried about it. And like I said, it's a lot less stressful because I'm not worried about if the lights are going to be cut off or something to that effect right now. I think the only other thing I did have one additional question that was wow. It was, and I've asked this question before. If you could, I don't know, they're personality questions, and I just asked them to see how people think. And it was if you could have lunch and have a conversation with three people, dead or alive, who would it be? Right? I remember I asked an interviewee that question, and they were like they tried to play on my strings, on my ego. They were like, Martin Luther King. Um, they're like Martin Luther King, my grandma, and and probably you. I was like, I was like, you landed on a little too thick. But of all three people dead or alive, ain't no way you want to eat lunch with my ass. You could have said Gandhi. You could have said Jesus. You could have said anybody else. You could have said, I want to drink wine out of a skull shaped chalice with Genghis Khan. You could have said anything but me. But they did ask that question. And it just because, I mean, one, I'm a dork. So I already just kind of think of these things. I was already like, okay, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. I was able to just kind of know those things off the break. But a lot of times they ask those personality questions not to try to trip you up, but they want to see how well you think. I know I asked them because I want to see how well someone thinks when they're asked something that they aren't expecting. Nobody's being expected to ask, who would you have dinner with, dead or alive? Or if you were a car, what make and model would you be and why? Like, no. But that's a question that I could randomly throw out. And most times, well, not most times, I'm gonna say most times questions like that, because they aren't based on a technical skill set or something related to the job, those questions are just throwaway questions. So those questions don't even have an attributable grade. So we know, like, okay, we got two questions we're going to ask that's kind of outside the box, that's going to, hey, we want to see what their initial reaction is off the cuff, how they bring it, how they think on their feet. These questions, regardless of how you ask them, you could bomb those two. I never thought about what type of car I would be. Probably a spaceship. You can be like, okay, that was a wild question, but those questions have no grades attributed to it, so it's not a it's not really a big deal. Now, there may be some places where they ask you a wild question, they're kind of like, oh, like no, like who would you interview and why? And you say something like, I don't know, kind of crowd like Ted Kaczynski. No, nobody gonna want to hear that. You probably not gonna get a job. But if you answer the question reasonable, most times you'll be fine. Most times, at most organizations, at every organization I've been at, those questions are throwaway questions, so they don't even have a grade. We don't even take those questions into consideration, even if you did say Ted Kaczynski, because the grade is just based on the rubric. How did you score on this question? Out of a 5, you got a 4, 3. So your grades is going to show through regardless of it. I think the only other thing that I had that was interesting was from the job interviews I've been on. Normally they're about an hour long. It's normally panels of 3 people. I had one interview that I thought was weird because it was an hour long interview with one person. Like, I don't know. I thought that was weird, but I had an hour long interview with one person, and they recently contacted me to do a follow-up interview with one person. And I'm like, what? Like, it was kind of cool because I actually had to show up. So I had to put on like a whole suit, just not basketball shorts in the upper part of a suit. So that was cool. that was cool to put on a whole suit and know that I could still fit in it. But it was just different because normally an hour long interview with one person is odd. I never had an hour long interview with one person. It's normally a panel, then maybe that second interview with one person. But it went well. It was a good disposition. They asked for references. They didn't call anybody, but I have a follow-up interview, so that's always a plus. If you get a follow-up interview, if you get called for references, I think like that's probably like the best outcome that you can have just from an interview standpoint. Um, and I think the last thing was I had one interview. This interview kind of scared me because the more time I have, the better I think the interview is going to go. So if I had an hour interview with a panel of 3, I feel really confident on that interview because I'm like, okay, I got more than enough time to answer the questions, be detailed but concise, but find those moments where I can show them a little bit of my personality so they can kind of see who the person I am outside of this resume, outside of this tight ass suit with this tie on, right? But this interview was different because it was a panel interview with 3 people, but it was only 30 minutes. And I was a little bit nervous going in because I already knew like, yo, it's 30 minutes. And then when you look at the people on the interview, you're looking at their titles, and I'm like, okay, these people with these type of titles, they don't have the damn time to be going over on a 30-minute interview. Trust me, I know. You know how hard it was to schedule an interview and you needed senior executives, C-suite executives on a panel. they're busy. It's hard to get the time to get them all in one room. So it was a 30-minute interview, person panel, and I was a little bit concerned just because I know in 30 minutes I'm not really going to have that time to find those one or two connection moments that I did. But it ended up going well. Um, it ended up going well. I was able to touch bases. I of course used my work well under pressure line because I mean I do. I think that's when you find out who the cream of the cream is. When everything is going good, everybody looks outstanding. Like, okay, everything is going good. There's no problem. Everybody looks outstanding during a time of peace and no conflict. But when shit hit the fan, that's when you find out who's the real, who's the fake, who can take the pressure, who can't. And me personally, I think I get more focused than pressure. Either I get more focused than pressure, or everybody else lose their shit, so I appear more focused. but uh, but I was able to touch bases with him when I talked about working well under pressure and my reference to getting shot at. When that's your litmus test, when your standard for pressure is getting shot at, anything else is just kind of like okay, I got to go in front of this jury, but they ain't shooting at me. so I kind of build up some value there. But even at the end, it was probably like 3 minutes left, and it was like, "You got any questions?" There's a panel of three. Each person is in a different section with multiple organizations underneath them. So I always ask, "Well, what values are important?" Name two values that are important to be successful. Each person gave two values. Then they want to talk about it a little bit. So I literally had like 1 minute left. So that was the only question I asked. Then I threw the curveball out there of, do my skills and experience match with your needs? And skills, experience, and values, you always got to look at a company's value proposition. Because if you look at their value propositions, you'll know exactly the type of people they're looking for. It'll say like, we our value proposition thinking outside of the box, inclusivity, and being reliable, and providing grade A outcomes for our clients. But so you always got to be cognizant of an organization's value proposition. And then I just spin those back in my answers. Because most times their value propositions, if I apply to a job there, your value propositions match up with something that I give a damn about. You know what I mean? So that's uh that's kind of how it's going on the interview front. So I keep y'all posted and let y'all know how everything developed. But so far so good. The past one, two, I would say probably the past 3 weeks, I've had at least two interviews a week. I think one week I had one. But like even this week, I got one tomorrow, another one Thursday, and I know that a previous job is calling my final reference. They got a meeting on Thursday with my final reference to see how that goes. So it's coming into fruition, and again, I'm just grateful that I got the ability to sit back and think about this shit and really focus on the jobs I'm applying to, because I want to apply the things that I actually want, and I had the luxury of doing that because I was a little bit strategical and tactical with the financial situation up until this point. Hey, as always, I appreciate everybody tuning in. I know this was a little bit long. I'm probably gonna have to dice this up and throw the job interview stuff out there as a separate video. But if you enjoyed this video, hey, make sure you check out the video that's gonna pop on the screen in the replay, because it's gonna be something on finances, attorney reactions, current events that you'll definitely enjoy. Y'all take care, be blessed. Peace.